Misha here, and this is one I am very excited and happy I'll be able to do a video on for you. Hope you enjoy it. This is the one, the only HMS Dreadnought of the Royal Navy. One of the most important naval ships in history, and arguably the most important battleship of the 20th century. And this is one I wasn't sure I'd be able to get. It's from the Eagle Moss 1 in 1100 scale diecast series. Warships of the World. There we go. Which are only made in Japan and are imported here sporadically. And no vendors had this issue in the USA, and I haven't seen it in stock. But as soon as I saw it on the list, I knew I really wanted to try to find Dreadnought, because there, for whatever reason, aren't a lot of models of Dreadnought. I don't know why. As important of a ship as it is, you can find tons of models of HMS Hood or HMS Nelson. But yeah, Dreadnought seems to be, yeah. And this is a good scale, good model for this. It's not the biggest in the world, but it's big enough for our purposes. And this is one of my lucky eBay finds. Not only did I find it on eBay, I found it for not at all a bad price, like 25 bucks. And it came with its magazine. So, pretty pleased. And to help me talk about Dreadnought and kind of put it in context of history, I brought out a couple of Japanese ships that we've already discussed. We have Satsuma, and we have Satsuma. These are both considered pre-dreadnoughts in a certain sense. We'll talk about that. And then I have two dreadnought types, or post-dreadnoughts. Well, technically, we have a dreadnought here. We have the Ganget from the Russian Navy, 1914. And we have the USS West Virginia, Colorado class, first laid down in World War I, but actually not fielded until after and of World War II service. And this is more of a quote-unquote super dreadnought. And don't worry, I will start doing videos on American ships. I'm just kind of focusing on Japanese and British to kind of break the series in a bit. So, with no further ado, why is Dreadnought so important? Alright, so before we get in, Mishaco. This is a pre-dreadnought. Now, even though this is a Japanese ship, she was actually built by Vickers in the UK, based on the British Formidable class. So, very good representation of a British pre-dreadnought battleship. She has two turrets, one in the front, one in the back. Each has twin 12-inch guns. And then she has up to 14 secondary guns and casements that are 6 inches. And that's a good example of a pre-dreadnought. They would have a couple of large guns and then several small guns. And the initial idea was the large guns, which were, had better range, better hitting power, but were much slower to fire. They would start off, and then as enemy ships got closer, the smaller guns would take over, which could fire much more rapidly and could pummel the enemy. They were also used more for defense, say, for example, against armored cruisers, later destroyers. Typically, pre-dreadnoughts, I should say late-style pre-dreadnoughts, were capable of a speed of about 18 knots. And a ship like this would have been laid down in the late 1890s, 1898, 1899, and would serve pre-World War I for the most part. German pre-dreadnoughts look much the same. Even French pre-dreadnoughts, they all kind of have the general shape and were between 400 and 500 feet long, with crews of, between 600 and 850, depending on the ship herself. In a way, they all were kind of similar and were cutting-edge technology until Dreadnought came out. Now, Dreadnought was laid down on October 2nd, 1905, and I will talk in detail about its concepts, but its initial proposal was to be the first all-big gun battleship, and a lot of this had to do with advancing technology. They found that after analyzing the Russo-Japanese War, which changed a lot of naval doctrine everywhere around the globe, that shots were being fired at previously unheard of ranges, 13,000, 14,000 yards, and etc. And it's really got them to rethink. Now, the problem with having a bunch of secondary guns and the primaries at such ranges were the splashes, trying to gauge hits, distances, yada yada. Also, the Russo-Japanese War showed that while the 12-inch guns of the Japanese and even Russian fleets were effective, smaller guns, such as 8-inch and even 10-inch, even if they hit, the range was so much that they would essentially just bounce off the armor. They were pretty ineffective, and they complicated the targeting, the aiming for the big guns. On top of that, the old speed of 18 knots was starting to look a little slow, and they were interested in new technologies, for example, the steam turbine, getting away from the old triple expansion engines. And there are plenty of other new tech, for example, fire control systems that they wanted to try out. However, Dreadnought was nearly not the first all-big gun. That was Tsushima. Sorry, Satsuma. You know what I meant. This was initially ordered in Japan in 1904 during the Russo-Japanese War, and was the first battleship ordered from Japanese shipyards. The rest before had been from Britain. Now, the idea of an all-big gun ship was really first voiced in 1903 by an Italian, but the Italian Navy wasn't really keen. But the Japanese Navy, the American Navy, and the British Navy were. So they all kind of started tinkering with the idea. And in Britain, its biggest advocate was Admiral Fisher. He assembled a committee in 1904 to kind of develop designs. And then when he was made first Sea Lord in October of that year, he was able to very quickly push through the idea of building an all-big gun ship. But again, Japan, being at war with Russia, ordered one first, and originally the Satsuma here was supposed to have 12 12-inch guns. So she was laid down in May of 1905. However, Japan, still having a new ship industry, still having to import quite a few parts, plus being in the middle of a war, they did not have a dozen guns for her. So she ended up becoming what is known as a semi-dreadnought. She would have 4 12-inch guns and 2 turrets, and 12 10-inch guns and additional turrets. Now, she was faster anyway, but she still used the old style of engines. And basically, she was again based on British designs, kind of an enlarged and updated Lord Nelson class, which in 1905 was Britain's cutting-edge battleship. But because of what was about to happen in England, this class they would build 2 of, they really weren't completed until 1910 because they were already obsolete before they even were finished. I mean, they barely were getting started on her when Dreadnought happened and changed everything. So with Lord Fisher at the helm, his committee worked on a design proposal, pretty much had the basics laid down by January 18th, 1905, and they hammered out some final details, including her armor arrangement, by February 22, so just about a month later. They decided to go with 10 12-inch guns and 5 turrets, and they would have a secondary battery of various 3-pounder guns. It would fluctuate between 27 and 22, just little anti-ship guns and whatnot, but the main show was the 12-inch guns. They would also go to the new steam turbine, which had been experimented with, and some smaller ships like cruisers and destroyers had been built with them. They were lighter, quieter, and more powerful. She was projected to get up to 21 knots, kind of a new standard. Although during sea trials, she would actually get over 21.5 knots, so that's good. She would be 527 feet long. She'd have a crew between 700 and 800 personnel. She would also have torpedoes, which, were a common thing. So they would submit the design proposal to the Navy. There was some politicking going on, but that would happen in March, and then they would finalize the hull design. They would actually look at several different hull shapes, finally kind of picking one in April, May. And in May, they started kind of delegating resources, material, and putting aside prefabricated parts. And in July, her turrets were ordered, and Lord Fisher wanted not only to build such a modern ship, but he wanted to build her in a year. So this wasn't going to just be an example of a new gun arrangement, new engines, other new technologies, but also showing the world how quickly Britain could produce a modern warship. So even though construction wasn't underway yet officially, they were getting ready for her. In fact, resources were pulled away from other projects, including 2 of the Lord Nelson classes that were already under construction. Well, she would finally be laid down on October 2nd, 1905, at Portsmouth, at what was considered the quickest, most experienced shipyard in really the UK and the entire world. On top of that, she was pretty much a round-the-clock effort. Typically, shipyards, workers would be doing a 48-hour week. With Dreadnought here, they would be doing a 69-hour week, which was 6 days a week, and they were done in multiple shifts. It was compulsory overtime. They were really putting things down. And progress was extremely rapid. By February 4th, 1906, the hull was complete, and then she was launched and christened on February 10th, and then she went for fitting out. On October 1st, 1906, she would start to build steam for the first time, and then 2 days later, on the 3rd, she would leave port for her initial engine trials, meaning 1 year and 1 day after she had been laid down. after engine trials, they would do gunnery trials. And then she would be commissioned into the Royal Navy, into the fleet, on December 11th, 1906, at which time she made pretty much every other battleship in the world obsolete, including the Lord Nelsons under construction in Britain, all older ships like Mikasa here, and even other ships under construction like Satsuma. Other ships, of course, like the Borodino and so on and so forth. Her new top speed was noticeably faster than previous battleships. She had new electronic fire control systems, also using more traditional methods like voice tubes. Of course, when she was built, anti-aircraft wasn't a thing, so didn't have an anti-aircraft battery. Facing forward with her turrets, she could bring to bear, straight forward, 4 of her 12-inch guns. Facing rearward, she could bring to bear 6 of her 12-inch guns. And then broadside, she could bring to bear 8 of her 10 12-inch guns. So nearly all of them. Again, there are 5 turrets. And several smaller guns that would kind of be changed about over time. So, an interesting development, revolutionary in naval history, but then a thoroughly boring commissioned career. Dreadnought, the 6th ship in the Royal Navy to bear her name, a name which is said to mean a fearless person, fearless individual, would start her commissioned career off with the shakedown cruise. She would first go into the Mediterranean for extensive testing, and then she would cross the Atlantic, calling in at Trinidad, and then she would return to Portsmouth on March 23rd, 1907. And, well, of course, the shakedown cruise showed some problems that needed correcting and things that needed fixing. Overall, her captain, Captain Bacon, who'd been part of the original Fisher Committee back in 1904, 1905, basically gave her a very glowing review. He said that even though there was a lot of new technology and whatnot on board, she performed better than could have been hoped. At this time, she was the most advanced battleship in the entire world and was made flagship of the home fleet. Now, her edge would not be last long. Of course, other nations would catch up. But at least until 1909 or so, she really was the best of the best. And she would remain flagship until 1911, when she would be relieved of that duty by HMS Neptune. After that, she would be bounced around here and there. She would go back for some minor refitting in 1912 and 1913, then back to the Mediterranean for trials and testing, practice. And when World War I began, she was actually stationed as a flagship, a division in the North Sea. Really, her only notable combat effort came on March 18th, 1915, when she intentionally rammed a German U-boat, U-29. U-29 had fired a torpedo at HMS Neptune and then surfaced to get away. Dreadnought would pursue her and intentionally ram her, cutting the submarine clean in two. pretty much would be her major thing that year. Otherwise, just doing patrol, whatnot. Then in April of 1916, she would go in for repair and refit in England, meaning that she missed the Battle of Jutland, which was on May 31st, 1916. She did not get out of refit until late June of that year, and afterwards she was assigned to basically guard the English coast near the mouth of the River Thames, with the idea of protecting against German battle cruisers that might try to sneak across the channel and shell the coast. But this never happened. In fact, the only time she fired her guns in anger while on this station, it was actually some newly installed anti-aircraft guns that she fired at German bombers heading towards London. So one of the early bomber raids. I don't believe she hit any of them, though. She would remain on this station through 1917, and then she would rejoin the Grand Fleet in March of 1918, and be a part of that in active service until August, at which time she would be retired out of the main fleet, kind of put in reserve, and kept there until February of 1919, at which time she was taken out of commission, recommissioned as a tender ship for the reserve fleet, and she would serve this duty until March of 1920, when she was put up for sale to shipbreakers, and then in May of 1921, in a large lot of 113 warships, she was sold off at a flat rate per ton to shipbreakers, who would collect her, and she would begin the shipbreaking process at the beginning of 1923. So she was built quick, she had a quick career, and then she was broken up. In fact, today it's quite sad because very few artifacts, very few pieces of HMS Dreadnought remain in the world. Most were scrapped up, because the problem about being the first of something is that very quickly you end up being the worst at it. This being the first steam turbine powered battleship and first all big gun battleship, others learned their lessons from her and improved upon them. In fact, there was only ever planned to be one in the Dreadnought class, because this was considered an experimental ship in 1905, 1906, and it was decided not to order more until after her sea trials. And then very quickly, like I said, newer ships like HMS Neptune would come in, and while Dreadnought was very much a successful experiment, a revolutionary experiment, she never really quite shook off that being the first status. So while very little of the actual ship survives today, and while her wartime history really was only of firing her guns a couple of times and taking out one submarine, her legacy, on the other hand, will basically never be forgotten. I picked Ganget here just to show of foreign response right after Dreadnought's release. I could pick anything from France or Germany or even, of course, Japan, designed after 1906, but this seemed like a good idea. This was studied up on right during Dreadnought's commissioning and officially laid down in 1909. And it already shows advancements. For example, this is it's a longer ship. It's nearly 600 feet long. It has 12-inch guns still, but now we have 4 triple turrets instead of doubles. And we're faster. We're using steam turbine. We're 24 knots, give or take. And just, showing several other innovations that were already coming in, because what Dreadnought did, she started a naval arms race with no holds barred, no treaties, no anything to, so it's just the best the engineers could do. By the way, she was between 19 and 20,000 tons, give or take. Whereas something like Ganget here was getting up to 24,000, 25,000 tons. So it just started to do that increase. Now notice both of these have standard turrets. Neither have super firing. That idea, that concept, that technology existed, but in both cases the designers decided not to utilize it because they were concerned about muzzle blast affecting other parts of the ship and the aiming slits and so on and so forth. And moving on here, like I said, I brought out West Virginia. Now, America was an early interested party in dreadnought types, as we'll call them, and might have even had the first one, but they were very leisurely about adopting their first one, which would be the South Carolina, which wasn't even ordered until March of 1906. So, right after Dreadnought's commissioning, although before, I shouldn't say commissioning, I apologize, launching, but before her commissioning. Either way, doesn't matter. America would get in the game. This was pretty much the ultimate American pre-treaty battleship. It was the first to use the even larger 16-inch gun, which outside of the Yamato would pretty much be the largest naval guns ever. She's even larger at 32,000 tons and faster, just showing the larger and larger aspects that would continue to grow with battleships, a race that Dreadnought started. Now, of course, there were attempts to halt it after World War I. First the Washington Naval Treaty, later the London Naval Treaty. But of course, by World War II, the race was on again with ships like the Bismarck, the Missouri, well, I should say the Iowa, the Missouri class, the Iowa class, Missouri and New Jersey and all those. The Yamato, the Mishaco, all of that stuff, which would ultimately lead to the last battleship ever built in the world by Britain, HMS Vanguard. But that's a story for another day. But it all really can be traced back to Dreadnought. She set so many of the form factors. Of course, they were greatly improved, expanded upon. But, yeah, it really all began with Dreadnought. And it's kind of funny because the ship herself saw virtually no combat, even though she made it through one of the most horrific wars in human history. But then again, it wasn't a heavily navalized war, not like World War II. And, of course, by World War II, she was 20 years in the boneyard. And there we have it. I hope that kind of explains why I wanted a model of Dreadnought so much. I would have been happy with a De Agostini or an Atlas, but for one thing, I don't think De Agostini ever made one. I don't know that Atlas did either. And you'd think this would be something like Forces of Valor would want to do, but nope. It's kind of weird. Again, you can find models of the Hood and the Nelsons, even Vanguard, but I don't know, I guess because they didn't have a big war record, there's just not as much of an effort to do Dreadnought. But yeah, this Eagle Moss model, like most of theirs, is very respectable quality for the relatively low price tag. The hull's solid metal. The top is, of course, plastic. Comes on a plastic stand with the name in Japanese. This one is circa 1907, so before any refits. It really its heyday when it was the best battleship in the world. So, yeah, and I've already covered the Japanese ships. You can check those out if you haven't. And already have done a video on the Ganget, and I will eventually get to American ships like West Virginia, and some others. I'm just waiting on a couple of other models to come in. With that, I'll let you go. If you have any questions or comments, please do post them below. That rhymed. I appreciate you tuning in. This is Misha, and I will catch you very soon next time.